My friend Emily wanted a planter, so she sent me a picture of this. And I said, oh, we can do better than that. And we did. I started out by figuring out my frame. I marked out on the table how high up the wall I wanted it to sit, and how far away from the wall I wanted to sit. That way I could just line up my 2x4s on these marks, and whatever hung over the table either got cut off or was going to be below dirt level. The top angle I cut off exactly where the line was, but for the bottom I left it long by about 12 inches so that it would have some meat to go into the ground, and cut it on an angle so that hopefully it would help drive this thing in the ground later. It certainly worked on my floor mat, unintentionally. I then moved on to cutting both the rails and the pieces for the flower boxes to length, just to make it easier to move around the shop. And then a very familiar sight for my last project, the planer and the table saw. Luckily I got a better table saw blade now, so I don't have to do quite so many back and forths, thankfully. But I just cleaned up everything so that it was nice and square. Et voila! Timber that's actually square, which you can't get in the store anymore. This would be so much easier if they didn't round the corners. At this point I started trying to resaw the 2x6s down, but my bandsaw wasn't having any of it. I think I need a new blade. So I helped it out a bit by running it through the table saw and getting most of the material out, and then going back to the bandsaw. I realized afterwards that this was a bit of a comedy of errors. My table saw actually would have been tall enough to cut all the way through that had it not been for the zero clearance insert that I put in that was holding the kerf knife down. And I also realized that my fence on my bandsaw is on the wrong side of the blade, which makes me think that these bars here are actually turned the wrong way as well. So I'm going to look into that because these bars really stick out and I'm constantly running into them. But somehow I still managed to resaw all these in half. So now I have two boards, where I had one. Now that the milling was done, I could actually start making the notches and any other cuts I needed to actually put this thing together. So I started off by working on the frame, marking out the top and bottom rails where they would insert into the uprights. The idea is that the bars would actually be flush with the front of the uprights, so they'd need to be notches on every single one of them. And because I wanted them all to line up, I decided to cut them all in one pass. So I clamped them together, making sure they were nicely lined up, and then I made sure to be extremely careful on both my edge cuts to make sure that they would be nice and clean, and then after that point I just started hacking away at it. This part's unnecessary, but for some reason very satisfying. Once that was done, I cleaned up the last little bit with a chisel and moved on to doing the same thing on the bottom one. Nice snug fit. Very snug. At this point I was so proud of myself. I had everything milled, I had these pieces cut, I had the notches beautifully done, it was looking out great, so I started gluing and screwing it together, and you'll understand why this is depressing later. But for now, everything went smoothly, a little bit of glue, fitting them in place, and then drilling out and screwing in. Worked out well, went together quite nicely. And there it is. Isn't it pretty? It's gonna have to all come apart, but that comes later. First, I started on the little brackets that would hold all the flower boxes in place. In order to find a level line, I marked off of the part that I knew was going to be sitting flush and level against the wall, and then drew a line with my speed square and marked it out on this little piece of wood. This would then become one of my templates in order to cut out all the little brackets that would hold up my boards. A lot of people use these little speed squares as just a right angle, but there's a lot of information that you can get off of these. Something like, if you use it like this, you can actually get the angle right there to transfer to your saw, and then cut your boards on the angle. Once I had the front of the angle cut, I brought it back over with my speed square and marked the angle again so that I could transfer that to all of my little cuts and make sure that when I screwed it onto the frame, it would have the right angle, the right level, and my little flower boxes wouldn't be wonky. Just to add some decorative flair, I beveled off the two front edges. Not necessary, but I think it makes it look nicer. And then progress. I moved on to gluing and screwing all of these little guys in place. Because I had drawn those angles onto it, I was able to line it up, clamp it in place, and screw it down. I did, however, go through it and pre-drill all the holes so that it would be a little bit easier to make sure these things didn't move. One row of wings. 4 rows of wings. The last thing to assemble was the flower boxes. And I hadn't completely decided how I was going to build these, so I took one of the smallest boxes and kind of just kept cutting until it made sense. Not usually the best practice, but it worked this time. Eventually I decided that the faces would be notched out so that they would be clean along the front, and the sides would actually fit into them, and that the back would actually follow the slant of the frame, but the front would be straight up and down. And then just a quick bit of glue, some nails, and that's it. You can see a bunch of the other ones already on the frame behind me. And there we have it. I think it looks cool. At this point, I thought I was doing so good. I was going to be able to install it today, everything was going fine. Just a quick bit of sanding, drilling some drainage holes, and we were off to the races. Or so I thought. Now, my shop is in the basement, and I can get a 4x8 sheet up and down the stairs, but this is 6x6, and there was no way it was going to clear. So I tried a few things and eventually had to take it all apart. And in theory this would be easy, just take out the top and bottom rails, we'd be fine. But my brackets are sitting on the top and bottom rails, which means they can't come out, which means they had to be slid out. You remember how tight those things were made? Yeah. So they had to be pounded out and then pounded right back in once I got to Emily's house.
Like it fits beautifully.
But eventually we got it put all back together and we could start at square one. Again. Now is a case of just lifting it into place, pushing it into the ground, putting the flower boxes on. And apparently the dirt was still slightly frozen. Small problem, we didn't notice it wasn't lined up. But we'll deal with that later. For now, it's getting dark and it's in place, which is good enough for today.
Alright, let's move this thing.
And although I did put spikes in the bottom of these,
Of course.
I had no idea this was hiding in her garden.
Oh look, a rock! Where do you want it?
But once that was out of the way, we were able to get this thing in place and start planting.
Or not level. Well,
But just level is not important.
who needs anything to be level?
I did level it. And after some interesting and somewhat questionable planting practices, we had a beautiful planter. If you want to see some more wood chip list videos, click here and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time!